Welcome to another episode of the Heart of Law podcast. My name is Mirena, and in today's episode, I have a guest that's been referred to as the $2 billion man. Someone who has the confidence to bring big American corporations to their knees. He was featured on the cover of 2021 Southern California Super Lawyers Rising Star magazine, which I think is very, very fitting. His name is Brent Wisner, and he is senior shareholder, attorney, and vice president with Baum Hedlund Law Firm in San Francisco. Brent received his JD and a Master of Public Policy from Georgetown University. Brent, thank you for accepting my invitations to be on this podcast. We're 2 days away from Christmas, so thank you for making this happen.
This actually is a perfect time because this is when people stop working normally. So I got a lot of free time now. So it's good. It's great to be on here. It's good to see you.
You too. We were just chatting before we started recording that we saw each other at some point before COVID. So it's sort of been blurry. What have you been up to since COVID? Like, how did that all unfold and change your life?
I mean, aside from hiding in a closet for a couple of years, it's actually been weird, at least from a professional level. It's been pretty interesting. I mean, we've actually had a lot of work. We'd settled Roundup just before the pandemic hit. So we've really spent a lot of time getting that settlement through and getting our clients money. Mm-hmm. That's been a project, to say the least. Working a lot on Zantac, and it's weird how the courts have adjusted so quickly and nimbly to the pandemic. And I think we all realize that we can do a lot of what we do remotely. We can do a lot of what we do by video. And I think that's a real compliment to our profession for being able to adjust. That said, yeah. I really miss being in a courtroom. I really miss being near people and actually doing stuff and connecting with juries. And I'm really hoping that changes in the next year or so. I think it will. I think it's going there. I think people are hitting that wall of isolation that they're done with. But yeah, it's been an interesting time, to say the least. How have you been? How are you holding up?
Good. I had a baby.
Gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. So it kind of was, I hate to say this, but it was perfect for me because I just needed to shut down and focus on being a mom, which we did. And me and my husband stayed home with the baby and my daughter, who's now almost a teenager. So we have a teenager and a baby. But it was, as hard as it was for so many other reasons, work. I wasn't sure what was going to happen with work. Sure. I actually needed that downtime. So we made the best of that. Thank you for asking.
Well, congratulations. That's great. That's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. He is here, so you might hear him screaming around. But
my sister and my brother both just had babies within the same 3 weeks of each other. And they're both their first time babies. And they're both 4 or 5 months old now. And they are perpetually exhausted. So the fact that you look so alive and happy right now is a huge compliment, because every time I see my siblings, they have this look of Brent, I miss when I was young and happy, and now life is so tough. So
this is me putting myself together, and people like you motivate me to put myself together when I'm recording this podcast. So there is the other side of that too, for sure. But he's 2.5, so he's over the hump, and we're getting better sleep. So look, I've followed your career since 2018 now, and it's just so refreshing to so many of us in the mass tort industry that a young, hungry trial lawyer gets to set multi-billion-dollar records. And in fact, you are the youngest lawyer in history that has gotten a verdict of this magnitude in Roundup. There aren't many trial lawyers that can be in front of a jury and ask to punish corporations for billions of dollars. But before we get into your track record, I want the audience to know who Brent Wisner is. How did this journey begin for you?
Well, it's really interesting. A lot of people go to law school, right? And they have this idea that they're going to, change the world or help, wrongly convicted people on death row because, those are the movies we saw, or they want to be, Law and Order, they want to be Jack McCoy or something, and I don't think I was any different. I mean, when I was younger, I knew that I kind of knew at a young age that I was privileged in a way. I knew things were easier for me than most people. And I could see that I had a lot of friends who weren't doing as well as my family was. And so I think I grew up with a very, very acute self-awareness that I could just go into the traditional white privileged male Ivy League education nonsense, but I kind of wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. And it was with kind of in that background that I actually, when I went to college, I knew I was going to go to law school. I knew I wanted to be an attorney. I knew that since I was about 8 years old. As soon as I learned what practicing law was, I knew I wanted to do it. And, wow. I did mock trial in college, and, I was ready to go to law school very, very much at the beginning. And when I, went to law school, I had bright eyes, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then, of course, law school changed everything. Law school is the absolute worst, as you can imagine. Well, I shouldn't say that. Law school does a lot of good things, but I think it also has a lot of dangers. I had bright, open, sort of idealistic eyes. And then obviously I think in law school, things changed. I got convinced of the need to go become a defense lawyer because that was the prestigious thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. So was law school sort of a rude awakening to the real world for you?
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, I went to a French school, right, where I didn't get a traditional American education. I got a traditional French education, which is different, to say the least. Like, I remember in college, this is sort of funny. So in my school, you were in the same classroom for everything. You didn't go to different classrooms. And I remember whenever the professor would walk in, you would stand up and stand next to your desk. You might have experienced something similar in Albania.
I did. I'm thinking that's exactly what I did.
And so I remember the first class in college, I went to UCLA, big public school. This is not like, anything like this, 20-person class that I'd grown up in. And I'm in this classroom, and the professor walks in, and I stand up. And everyone's looking at me like, who the hell is this weirdo standing? Why is he standing next to his desk? And I'm like, oh, I guess this is different. And it didn't even occur to me. But so in some ways I had a rude awakening in college, but I think for the sort of the trashing of the ideals that my dad was, an activist. He was an environmentalist. He had marched against Monsanto with Cesar Chavez and helped farm workers. I grew up in Topanga Canyon, which is like a hippie commune culture in Los Angeles, outside of Los Angeles, right? Mm-hmm. So I had grown up in a very liberal, very idealistic sort of environment. And then I got to Georgetown, and it's a factory for defense lawyers, right? And they have a process. And don't get me wrong, I got a great education, great school, but they have a system, and they break you down the first year. They make you feel like, yeah, you're not as smart or as capable or as great as you thought you were. And then the second year, they work you so hard that you forget what you're doing and convince you that the only thing that's worthy of this prestigious education that you're getting is to go work for, Williams and Conway or, some fancy defense firm. And then they drill it into you, and then you interview, and then you spend your summer at some big fancy I went to Paul Hastings in LA and got wooed and dined and got paid a lot of money for the first time in my life. And, next thing you know, you're thinking, oh, this is the way to go. This is the approach. And the idea of being a plaintiff's lawyer didn't even occur to me.
Wow.
Until I had a breakdown in my third year of law school. I kind of had a crisis of faith. And I think that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me, actually.
Did you question everything? Did you question the fact that you're in law school, or what exactly you wanted to do when you came out of law school? Because I saw you, you were kicking ass even in law school. You were in the advocacy program.
Yeah, we did mock trial. I did mock trial, and it was the Barristers Council thing at Georgetown. And I was really, really good at it. I was really good at the trial stuff and thinking on my feet and and connecting with people. I think that was really where I was excelled at. I'm pretty smart sometimes, but I'm also going to be an idiot like most people. But it was really that connection that I could create with people. And it's funny because what I was slated to do was to get into securities litigation. That's what I had spent my summer, at the big defense firm doing. And that's basically, rich people suing rich people about dollars on some security. I mean, it was as far from idealistic as it comes.
Yeah.
Securities law has its place in the world. I'm not trying to, talk ill of anyone who does that. But, it wasn't really the sort of meaningful, change the sort of world viewpoint that I kind of wanted to do. And I kind of had this breakdown in probably about February of my third year of law school. I realized I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to be part of a machine just to make money. And I'd already put on some debt, I'd already, made these big decisions, and I realized it was very difficult to sort of pull away from that without destroying any semblance of a career. And so I kind of looked around, you know what I mean? I said, oh, what can I do? And I said, I'll go clerk for a federal judge. That's a great sort of non-corporate law, but it gives me some time to figure out the heck I want to do. But the problem was, those things are decided years in advance. There's this application process where you apply, and I'm looking to start this job in 4 months. It's sort of late to the game. So I ended up going onto the portal, the online portal, to see what was available. And there was 2 judges at that time that were hiring. One was a federal judge in Kentucky, and the other one was a federal judge in Hawaii. And, I said,
Kentucky, Hawaii.
Well, I mean, the likelihood of me getting those jobs was basically zero, right? I mean, wow. These are very coveted positions. I'm late to the party. My grades weren't the best. They weren't that bad, but they weren't I wasn't a straight A student in law school by any measure. Mm-hmm. So I applied. And it's really funny. The Judge Gilmore in Hawaii, who I ended up working for a couple of years, I think I was the last person to send in my application. I mean, that's how late I was. I think it was due at midnight, and I sent it at 11:59, in 30 seconds kind of thing, just under the gun. And I think because of that, when her assistant printed out all the applications, mine was on the top, right? It was the last one in. And it's funny because Judge Gilmore had literally just booked a trip to Washington, D.C. for her judicial conference, which they have every 4 years in D.C. And she looks down, she sees my resume, and she says, oh, Georgetown, I'll be in D.C. What the heck? I'll interview him while I'm there. I mean, it's really like dumb luck. Okay, that's how she noticed my application. Probably in a stack of 3,000. I mean, we're talking about a very difficult position to get.
Wow.
But then it gets better, right? So she gets to DC. So she comes to my town. And when a federal judge in Hawaii wants to interview people, it's tricky because they want to interview a bunch of people, but they want to do it in person, but they're in Hawaii, right? You have to fly all the way out to Hawaii for an interview. That's a bit of a gamble, sort of a tension there. But she came out to DC. So it was the day before my graduation. She was there in April, and she was at this hotel, and I get to the hotel lobby, and she says, all right, hey, Brent, I'm sorry. My husband's going to get here in 15 minutes. We have a bunch of stuff we're doing. You got 15 minutes. Let's talk. And I'm like, all right, I got 15 minutes to do this. Let's do it. Right. Mm-hmm. But again, fate and luck kind of landed in my lap again. Her husband's flight got delayed, and he was 3 hours late. And so our 15-minute interview turned into a 2 and 3 hour interview. And we went to the bar, had a couple of drinks. Her husband showed up. I got to meet him. We bonded. We all became friends, and I got this job, which I had no business getting. It was crazy. I mean, there was a little bit more to it, but that's essentially what happened.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's what I know those moments, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you're at the right place at the right time, that everything is just happening, and there's a little bit of a divine intervention, but you just come across like there is almost like no resistance with you, right? You know what you want, and you're like, I'll take a shot at this, and then kind of let the chips fall as they may. Is that your personality or your way of?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I've always been sort of I make decisions quickly. and decisively. And that is very often damaging, right? Because I'll make the wrong decision. Don't get me wrong, but I'll make decisions. And I honestly believe, and I always have for a long time, that making a decision, whatever it is better than just not acting, right? Mm-hmm. And so, we have to make decisions. We have to decide what we're going to do. And, if you're going to do something that you think is wrong, either don't do it or knowingly know what you're doing and face the consequences of your wrong actions. I try to avoid doing wrong things, but the point is being, at cause over what it is that you're doing instead of the effect of the world. I think to the extent you can try to be the cause of what you're trying to create or do, I think it lends to more sanity and happiness. Mm-hmm. But it also leads to some mud on your face, and trust me, I got a lot of it, So I think it really cuts both ways. But that's just the philosophy I always had, and I think it's a product of the way I grew up and my family. I had 3 older brothers and a younger sister and an eclectic father who, oddly enough, is the reason why I ended up at Bob Headland in the end. And my mom was, she was a Russian, very very smart. And the breadwinner in my family. She was always traveling for work. She started a software company in the 70s as a woman, which is just unheard of. And had a bunch of kids at the same time. I honestly don't know how my mom did it. She's a freaking amazing person.
Wow.
But she's also high level super genius. So, I definitely, with her, my father's also brilliant too. And he's more creative and he's more aggressive and more, intentional. I think that combination of being intelligent and thoughtful and also being aggressive and, ambitious, I think I got that from my folks pretty cleanly. And of course, my brother kicking the crap out of me and not letting me get away with anything for
yeah. Wow, that's fascinating. So you come from a great family. It's not like you were struggling to put yourself through school, or you had the financial means, and like you said, you just had this acute awareness that you were lucky, that you were privileged, and you were looking not necessarily for a profession to just survive. You're looking for a profession to thrive and to find meaning and purpose. And I think that's just so incredible. It is such I think a lot of people, like, for example, if I take my own experience, for a long time, it was just trying to get out of survival. Mm-hmm. And then after I got out of survival, I started thinking about meaning and purpose. Sure. But you can't really sometimes think about meaning and purpose if you're just trying to pay the bills or trying to you're coming from another country, for example, is just truly survival. So, and I'm experiencing that. And obviously, as I'm raising my kids, I don't want them to spend mind share on survival. Like, they have what they need because I'm providing for them. But now it's like making sure I'm motivating them to be hungry and to go out into the world and make a difference. Yeah. And you just innately knew that. So I'm curious to know the self-discipline piece, right? Because the self-discipline, I think that is probably one of the key things that makes or breaks someone. How did you have that innately, or did you cultivate that?
I think a lot of it came from the way I was raised. Sure, my parents weren't poor, but they also weren't rich by any measure. I went to UCLA. My tuition was $4,000 a year. You know what I mean? It wasn't like I had an expensive school and I had partial scholarship, and I lived at home most of the college because that would save me money, right? Because we lived in LA at the time.
Okay.
So I don't want to give you the idea that we were like some super rich family that things were. I had to pay for my own law school. I had to take out loans and a lot kind of stuff. So it wasn't like everything was paid for. But even though I say we were privileged in the sense that my parents were well enough off to have a house that was in a safe place. And I was able to go to this French school largely because I was a childhood actor doing commercials and using that money to pay tuition and stuff. But my parents also helped. Mm-hmm. And also, the other thing was just, my folks, for example, I had three older brothers, and two of my brothers and I literally shared the same bedroom my whole life, right? We didn't have our own bedrooms. It wasn't like a huge house, but my dad was very, very, very insistent on there always being a concept of exchange in the family. And what I mean by that is, let's say I wanted something. Let's say I wanted to go to a friend's house for the weekend, okay? Or I needed money to go do something, right? It wasn't just, hey, give me money or take me to my friend's house. It was, okay, well, what are you going to do in exchange for the time it's going to take me to drive you there? Because, we lived in Topanga, everything was 40 minutes away, right? And one of the ways that he developed the system was, this is pretty crazy, people think, but it's actually pretty cool. Every Saturday morning, he would post a chores list, right, on his door. And every single chore had a certain number of chips, blue chips associated with it. And you would go up and you would, sign your name on, I'm taking on this chore. You could do none of them if you didn't want to. I'm doing this chore. And then you would go do it, mow the lawn, clean the pool, wash a car, whatever. And then he would come out and inspect your work to make sure it was done correctly, and then sign it off and then give you the chips. And then those chips could be used to get money for something, or get used for getting a ride somewhere, or you want to save up a bunch, you want to go on a ski trip or something, and it's going to cost $600. You save up for that all year. So there was a clear path to, if you work hard and if you are disciplined, you get rewarded. And I grew up that way. People think that's a little crazy. They're like, what? It's like your house was run like a corporation. And it kind of was, but I think in a there's plenty of love, don't get me wrong. But when it came to this concept of exchange, it was sort of central. And I think that was a huge part of me thinking, well, I'm not going to get anything for free. But, you add that with the sort of idealistic liberalism that I grew up in. And I think it was, okay, I need to work hard. I need to do something good for the world. And I need to take advantage of the fact that I have these gifts, whether it be a good family, some natural talent, to do something meaningful in the world. And that was sort of how I grew up. Now, kind of took a departure for a little bit in law school, but then I came back to it ultimately in the end. Obviously, I think I ended up in a really cool place where I get to do good work for helping real people, and it's very fulfilling.
That's amazing. That's such a great story. Such a great story. So what causes are you currently passionate about?
Gosh, that's tough. I think one of the things that I'm particularly sensitive to, and I think this is a function of having my time at Baum Headland, which, the way I ended up here is itself sort of a hilarious story, but I
do want to hear that story.
Sure. But one of the things that Baum Headland does that I really cherish, I've spent my entire legal career here, right? I haven't worked in any other law firm in any meaningful sense, besides a summer at a big law firm, and then obviously for a federal judge for a couple of years. But my legal career has otherwise been here. And, one of the things that we do that's very different than a lot of firms, and I'm not saying other firms don't do this, but most don't, is we get these documents in litigation, right, that show all this terrible stuff, misconduct, corporate malfeasance, whatever. But no one ever sees it, right? It just remains secret because it's all couched in these confidentiality orders or whatever. And they're not confidential. It's just the corporation doesn't want people to see their dirty laundry.
Right.
And one of the things that we do routinely is we publish and de-designate documents, go through that process. It can be very time consuming. It can be, in the Monsanto case, it could almost end your career, as it almost did for me. It's another story if you want to hear about it, how I saved my career in front of Judge Chavria, never know how to say his name correctly. But there's I think it's something I really value, and that is getting things out into the public, getting things out in a way that people can see what's happening in litigation. And I think that's very often not done because it's very hard to see how that directly helps your client, right? And you're there for your clients. You're not there for any other reason. I think it does. I think it does in a lot of ways. But this fighting confidentiality, and I've done some work with Yale Law School. They have a great basically secrecy program there, where there's a lot of great professors and collaborators getting together to work on these things. And so that's probably something I'm very passionate about, at least from a legal perspective. And it's sort of a weird thing to be passionate about, secrecy in law, but it's something that I really care about.
Well, I saw that, and it was going to be a question I was going to ask you about, because I saw that you went the extra mile to take these documents that were under seal and make them available to the public because of public health, safety reasons. And I thought that is so classy. And ultimately that just boils down to integrity, right? And I meet so many law firms. I mean, my job is to meet law firms and help them, restructure the business model and scale and, do all of the things that the law firms want to do, especially when they're going into, significant MDLs. Mm-hmm. But it's hard because you get people with different values that prioritize what's important to them very, very differently. And so when you have partners in a firm that say, this is important, this is the baseline, the foundation of our culture, is that it's not just about the multi-billion-dollar verdict. It's also about meaningful change in the way that these corporations do things. That just sends such a clear message, right? And it separates you all from so many others. So it's good that you're setting a trend and it's an example, a great example for other law firms to follow suit.
Well, I'll just tell you, it was hairy. I mean, so, the biggest example of this is obviously the Monsanto papers, right? Which are a collection of documents related to Monsanto that are all public now. Yeah. It spurred numerous documentaries, numerous, investigative journalists have won big awards for delving into these documents. It's caused rampant change in Europe, but the story of how they actually got released is pretty fascinating. And it actually starts basically, back in 2017. Monsanto was winning the PR fight, right? They had the EPA and every other regulator saying, oh, Roundup is safe. There's nothing wrong here. These plaintiffs' lawyers are ambulance chasers, and they're just trying to create scare tactics, yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And we knew that was bullshit, right? We knew it was false. We had the documents. We knew that they were lying, and we knew that they were planting stories and then leveraging those stories to try to convince politicians to defund independent scientific organizations. They were doing everything in their power as part of a concerted effort called Freedom to Operate, which is this program within the company. Again, all confidential. And I was freaking sick and tired of it. So was Michael Baum. So was my colleague, Pedram Esfandiari. He was a young, brand new associate at the time. And I said, this is bullshit. So we got all the hot documents together. And the protective order in the MDL said that if you challenge a document, right, Monsanto has to meet and confer. And if whatever we reach an impasse on, they then have to go file a motion to seek its confidentiality preserved. If they fail to file that motion within 30 days of the initial letter starting the process, if they fail to file that motion, all the confidentiality is automatically waived. And that's literally what it says in the order. So Pedram and I put together this chart, hundreds of documents describing each one, explaining its relevance, explaining, why it's not confidential, whatever. Spent hundreds of hours on this project. And we sent it to Monsanto and said, hey, let's talk about de-designating these documents. And I remember this vividly. We got on the phone and they said, Brent, and I was at this time, didn't have any multi-billion-dollar verdicts. I was not, leading anything. I was just a young, wise-ass lawyer that they thought they could push around. And they said, okay, Brent, we read your document. We don't think we have to respond to this. We think you should just go away. And I said, you're telling me to go away? Yeah. Can I quote you on that? Yeah, sure. So you're refusing to talk about these documents. You're telling me to go away. Yes. This went on for 20 minutes. And I said, okay, fine. Well, we reached an impasse on these documents. Fine. And we hung up. And I waited 30 days, no motion. I waited 31 days, no motion. And I was like, well, they waived him. So on the 32nd day, I sent every one of those documents to the EU Parliament. I sent them to the Department of Justice. I sent them to the California EPA, and I posted each one of them online on our website. And this is what's now known as the Monsanto Papers. The next day, Monsanto's lawyers went apeshit, and they filed an emergency motion with Judge Chabria and the MDL saying, Mr. Wisner's firm should be sanctioned. They should be removed from any leadership position. In fact, the entire plaintiff's leadership should be removed because they weren't properly supervising Mr. Wisner, and all these terrible things should happen. I quickly prepared a response saying, oh, they waived it, whatever. And Judge Chabria gets on the phone and says, okay, well, I've read Monsanto's papers. I haven't yet read any responses, but it's pretty clear to me that Mr. Wisner acted in bad faith. And so I'm ordering Mr. Wisner to show up in person in my courtroom in 2 weeks and explain why I shouldn't sanction him, his firm, and remove them from any leadership positions, as well as the entire plaintiff's leadership. See you in 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. I'm like, oh, wow. Holy crap. This has got really dangerous, really fast. And of course, the co-leads in the MDL, I was freaking toxic. I was toxic. They started, they all started. I'm not going to say they threw me under the bus, but they definitely pushed me. I wasn't standing next to them anymore.
Wow.
They insisted that I hire a lawyer. And so I did. I hired this ethicist out of San Francisco, and we sat down to prepare for the hearing. And I said, okay, the first question Judge Chabria is going to ask you is X. He's going to ask you this question. Let's practice your answer, because this is the most important question you'd answer. We practiced it. We rehearsed it. Okay, great. Walk into court. The entire courtroom is filled with plaintiff's lawyers and defense lawyers. I mean, these are literally everyone you ever known in mass torts are sitting in this courtroom, and they're all here to watch the execution of Brent Wisner. No one is here to support me. No one is here to get my back as much as they all probably want me to be successful. They're all here to sort of watch the spectacle of my execution. If Judge Chabria, as anybody knows, he can be biting, to put it politely. He can be very, very intense. So we go up, and Judge and my lawyer starts talking, and first question comes out, and for some strange reason, the lawyer that we had hired decides to just not do the answer we had rehearsed. It was the question I told him was coming, and we got this, and it started going around and he doesn't answer the question. Chabria is getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And finally, I just stand up and say, Your Honor, can I just respond to your question? I'd like to answer your question. And my lawyer's like, Brent, no, I got this. Sit down. I got this. No, I don't want you talking, yada, yada, yada. And Judge Chabria is like, I'd like to hear from Mr. Wisner, please. Can you please, sit down? He's like, Your Honor, represent me. He's like, listen, to my lawyer, sit down or I'll put you in jail. So whatever you want. And he was like, okay. Sitting down. Wow. This is my moment of defense, right? I have him already saying on the record that I've acted in bad faith. I have him threatening to put my lawyer in jail. He is fuming angry. And this is when I get to defend myself. This is the moment of my career's complete and utter annihilation, right? This is the moment where I'm going to lose. It's over for me. After this, I'm just going to go be a barista at Starbucks, okay? Which actually sounds like a lovely job. But, I got up there and I said, I'd like to answer your question, yada, yada, yada. And he interrupts me, and I said, well, I start explaining why I did. And he goes, exactly, Mr. Wisner. And he interrupts me. He goes, exactly. Because you're more interested in being a PR man than being a lawyer. Release documents first, ask questions later. And what this litigation needs is more lawyers, not PR men, right? And I lost it. I did. I came back at him as hard as you can ever go back at anybody, let alone a federal judge who's about to sanction you. Mm-hmm. And I just told him he doesn't know how to practice law. He doesn't have any idea what we're doing. That if he thinks that I was doing this for PR, then he doesn't understand. I talked about how my family and father marched with Cesar Chavez, that this fight against Monsanto has been one for my whole life. And I did this for public health. I did this to stop the next cancer, not the ones that already had happened. And that his insistence, and we go on for about an hour and a half. And it's pretty intense. But he goes from being very angry to sort of reserved. And then Monsanto comes up and he nails them. He says, you told him to go away. You acted in bad faith. We're going to have a hearing after this about why you shouldn't be sanctioned. That is unacceptable. And then these documents are, they show terrible conduct by your client. And he's like, well, Doc, Your Honor, that's Mr. Wisner's characterization. He's like, oh, really? Because it says right here that you guys are engaged in ghostwriting. That wasn't Mr. Wisner's. This is your own client's words, right? And it's like, oh, yeah, it was a pretty fascinating thing. Anyway, the way it ends, and this is pretty hilarious, we take a break, he calls us back in the chambers, the court reporter comes in, she kicks the court reporter out, and we have a confidential conversation about how things are going to go down. I can't talk about that. Obviously, it's confidential. But afterwards, we submitted a statement saying that Baumhedlin would resign from leadership and not participate in the case after general causation, after the science, because we were such an important part of that scientific process. And we would resign after then. And then obviously a year later, we got through that. And then Monsanto said, okay, we got through science. Mr. Wisner has to go. That's like he said. And the judge goes, I'm going to change my opinion. I think Mr. Wisner has been a fantastic lawyer in this process. I think we need good lawyers. I'm changing it. He can stay. And so in the end, it worked, but it was pretty hairy.
I have chills. Wow.
Yeah.
What an incredible story that is.
Yeah.
The highs and the lows of chasing justice. Wow.
It was scary. But in the end, the Monsanto papers are out there. They've had a huge effect on a lot of different activities and the way we think about regulation in the pesticide industry. They've made multiple documentaries. They're making a couple of movies about it. There's a book that was written called The Monsanto Papers by Carrie Gillum. So it's really an interesting story that, really is a prelude ultimately to me getting to try the first case, which was its own crazy story. But it's that kind of stuff. And we didn't have to do that, right? We didn't have to put our careers on the line to get documents out from under seal, but we did it because it was the right thing to do. And it worked out in the end, but it was very scary in the end.
Right. So what does your dad say and think about what you do for work?
I mean, my dad is so proud of me. He just is. He's been an environmental activist his whole life.
Wow.
And he this is a funny story, actually. This is hilarious. So back when I was in law school, one of his friend, Dr. Lovejoy, was getting this really prestigious award for environmental work that he'd done in the Amazon. And he invited Michael, his friend, to come see him get the award. And we get to this table that we're assigned to. And my dad's in the bathroom or something. He's going to come join us in a few minutes. And I sit down and I look around. There's a bunch of people in the suits. And I'm like, oh, hi, Brent. Nice to meet you. I'm a law student. It's actually in DC, so it was convenient. I was right there. I was going to law school. Oh, I'm a law student, yada, yada. What are you all doing? Like, oh, I'm a director of marketing at Monsanto. And one for one, every single person at the table was a Monsanto executive. Probably people that I ended up deposing later. I don't even remember, right? But every single one of them. And I'm going, oh God. And I'm like, they're like, what? And I'm like, well, okay, I'm sorry right now, because my dad's going to be here in a minute. And when he finds out that you guys all work for Monsanto, it's going to get really awkward. And he came back, he sat down, and he just, oh, what do you work? He's like, you work at Monsanto? How the heck do you live with yourself? What kind of person decides to actively work at a company? You do realize? And he starts going down the shit that they've done. It was hilarious watching these people be like, why am I being accosted by this random crazy hippie about my job? It was a pretty entertaining dinner, I'll tell you that much.
Wow. I mean, this has come full circle. What a crazy story this is. So tell me that I want to get into the trials, right? So I read that Mike Miller, a great lawyer, who unfortunately recently passed, He had a horrible accident in 2018, and that's how you were called to try the case. I believe the Johnson case.
That's right. That's
So
right.
tell me that story.
Well, it's funny because it actually starts off a couple of years earlier, incidentally, in a Alexandria federal court. It was my first trial ever. And I was trying the case with a guy named Pete Miller, Mike Miller's brother.
I see.
I had gotten brought into the case. It was a Cymbalta case, the litigation no one's really heard of, but we did it. And I tried the case there. Senior trial lawyer, first case ever. I was, a young pup, to put it politely. And, Mike Miller came to watch my closing argument. And I did my thing. And we come back to the war room and he goes, Brent, I want you to know that was the best closing argument I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm going to steal a lot of the stuff that you do because that was just phenomenal. I was like, well, thank you, Mr. Miller. And he's obviously this very seasoned, very successful trial lawyer. And then he goes, but you're going to lose. I'm like, why? He's like, look at your jury. And he was right. I was representing a poor Black woman who was living in a pretty rough neighborhood, and a Muslim woman who wore her garments in court, right? And we had a jury full of rich white people who were, largely Republican. And 2 hours later, defense verdict, unanimous, lost everything. Mm-hmm. Tough case also on the merits. There were some tough issues there, but also, didn't matter how good of a lawyer I was, I lost. And I was obviously distraught, despondent. I contemplated quitting law. I mean, it was really bad. I'd spent $1 million on this case and had nothing to show for it. I felt like a consummate failure, to put it politely. But Mike Miller got to see what I could do. So then flash forward a couple of years, Mike Miller has his case, the Johnson case. And it's obviously in Roundup, and I'd been working in Roundup, obviously pretty aggressively on the science and generally, but I knew nothing about Mr. Johnson or his case. Mike Miller is out kite surfing at 70 years old in Virginia Beach. I mean, I hope I'm kite surfing when I'm 70. So what a badass, to put it politely. And he goes 30 miles per hour into a pier, boom. And lungs collapse. I mean, he almost dies. And so his number two, a guy named Tim, who's going to try the case now because he's the other guy. He's kind of senior. He's the next person up, so to speak. And he's a trial lawyer. He calls me up, and he and I had always been kind of friendly, gotten to know each other. And he kind of respected me, and I respected him and a lot of the work he did. And he said, hey, Brent, we're going to trial in 2 weeks. Mike Miller, he literally leaves the hospital, but will you come help with the case? Maybe do an expert or two. So we have a lot of work on our hands. I said, I'll do whatever I can to help. Love Mike, sure, obviously. He's like, great, we'll get on a call on Monday morning. So we get on the call Monday morning. I have my group of people who at this point, it's just me and my associate. I hadn't put together a trial team yet because I'm assuming they have a trial team. Get on the phone and I hear, hey, Brent. And all of a sudden I hear, gunk, big noise. And one of his colleagues, Dave Dickens, says, hey, Brent, I'll have to call you back. Okay. So an hour and a half goes by. We finally get a call from Dave Dickens. And he's like, Brent, I don't know what's going on. Tim collapsed. He had a grand mal seizure and he's had a pretty severe head injury now. And so he's out of commission for the next 2 weeks. So I'm now trying the case. And I said, oh, nice to meet you, Dave. Seem like a nice guy. He's like, all right, Brent. So I got one question to start this off. I'm like, what? He's like, what's Roundup? I'm like, oh, I see. I get it. And Dave Dickens is a charismatic, very smart, very good trial lawyer. He just hadn't been working on Roundup. It just wasn't his thing. So I sit down with him and I say, listen, man, let me try this case. He's like, I know it. I've been practicing these openings and closings and cross-examinations in the shower for the last 2 years. Let me do this. Give me that trust. And he's like, all right, it's yours. Have at it. And he picked the jury. He did a phenomenal job with that. But that's how I got in. And I remember vividly driving up the next day, packing all my shit, driving up to the Bay Area, where I now live. But at the time we were in LA, drove up to the Bay Area, and I went and met Lee Johnson and his family. And I remember walking to his house, or his townhouse apartment place, and his wife was there, and she's working 3 jobs. He is not working because he's so sick and he's very close to dying. They got the cutest kids you've ever met in your life. And, she's in her scrubs, getting ready to go do some sort of nursing like job. And I sit down and I say, well, can I just talk with you all for a few minutes? And she was like, okay, I got 5. What's up? What is this? Like, who are you? Why are you here? And I'm like, well, we have this big lawsuit against Monsanto. And she's like, okay. And she thinks this is one of Lee's like schemes, right? She doesn't think this is like anything material or important.
Yeah.
And I said, well, we're suing him. We think that this product caused his cancer, and, we're hoping to get some money to help, pay for the damage they've caused in your life. It's kind of an important case. And she's like, oh, okay. She's like, so what are we talking like $100,000? Is that sort of what we're talking about? And I said, well, no, I'm going to be asking them for hundreds of millions of dollars. And she looked at me like, what does that mean? Would we get this money? And I said, yeah, that's the idea. Mm-hmm. And she starts crying, and she says, you mean I wouldn't have to work 3 jobs? I could actually spend time with my kids. Like, the idea of this and the importance of this hadn't even crossed her mind.
Right.
I realized right in that moment, like, shit, I have to win now. I cannot not do everything in my power to win. So that was the sort of setting the stage for the case. And then 2 weeks later, we started picking a jury. So it was a pretty crazy couple. It was actually 10 days later at that point. So
that's the closing argument that I saw, I think, the 2-hour closing argument that's
right.
Out there. So I watched that, and not the whole 2 hours, but some of the key moments there, the opening and then towards the end. And obviously you knew what you were talking about. You had, like you said, you had rehearsed this case, but there was almost like you were in flow. There was a knowing, a conviction that you were trying to right a wrong. You were trying to, through that verdict, change the world. And so you said in the beginning of this conversation that you go into law school thinking you're going to change the world. Here you are, changing the world. How do you prime the pump? And I want to go back to the case, but how do you prime the pump to be ready for a trial of that magnitude? Like, what's going through your head? And how old were you? 33, 34?
I think I was 33 at that. 34. I was young. I might have even been 32, actually. I don't remember. I don't remember my age, but I was young.
Yeah. Is there some, the confidence is just incredible. Is that something that you do to get yourself ready for these big moments?
It's interesting. I've had a lot of people ask me about that. How do you go into a courtroom and just act like you own it? Why do you think you're entitled to that? Or why do you feel like you're able to do that? And the simple fact is, and this is sort of silly, but I don't think about it. Right. I don't hyperanalyze. I think there's 2 ways of thinking the world, right? Viewing the world. You can just constantly look out, or you can look from the outside in. And I never do that outside in. Whenever I look in the mirror, I'm always like, oh, that's what I look like? Oh, okay. Didn't realize that. Probably should shave or get a haircut. Or, I'm so constantly looking outward and engaging what's around me that I very often forget what I look like. I very rarely self-reflect in that way. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing and a bad thing, right? It's a bad thing in the sense that I can miss errors in myself, and I do all the time. The good thing is I can have a sort of intensity and passion and conviction into something that I'm doing and focusing. And it's one of the things that I teach the younger lawyers now at my firm is when you're taking a depo, get your face off of your outline and listen to the answers. because some of the most important stuff you're ever going to get in testimony is because you were listening and you said, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And then you hammer them. And then you get that great soundbite or you get that great admission. It always happens then. Not always, but most of the time happens then. And being able to think on your feet and be engaged in what you're doing in the moment and not thinking about this process, but what you're doing is important. And I think when you're talking to a jury, if you believe in it and you don't hide and you don't hide anything or try to trick them, you'll win. I mean, assuming you're right, obviously, sometimes you have a dog case, but if you're right, you're going to win. And I really mean that. I mean, I'll tell you, during a trial, I will very often say, you know what, earlier I said this, and I was wrong on that. Mm-hmm. Sorry about that. I was wrong. I misstated the fact there. I believed it to be correct at the time, obviously, but I was wrong. So put that in context. But I wasn't wrong about the rest of this, right? And juries love that shit because they're like, oh, you're a human and right. You acknowledge when you're wrong and you acknowledge. It doesn't mean everything I'm saying is right, but it means that, you know, I'm being as sincere as you can. And if you're truly bringing sincerity with some passion, mm-hmm. you can move mountains, right? You can move mountains with what you're doing. And, you know, I think one of the important things with a jury is you really create, as much as you can, a sense of importance, right? And if you think about it, there's an incredible amount of drama in a trial, right? Mm-hmm. You have a person, Lee Johnson, he's dying of cancer. He's 30 something, and he's dying of cancer, and he has these two beautiful kids. And this moment in this courtroom, in that trial, right, is going to define the rest of their lives. This is this moment that this jury has a privilege and burden, it's both, of having to make this decision, and they're responsible for him. They're responsible for him. And then, of course, there's also even the greater impact on the company and potentially the world. And I think creating that moment, creating that intensity, because it's there in any trial, mm-hmm. Is our job, right? And even if you lose, you've created that for your client, and that's all they can ask for. They've gotten their day in court, right? And I think that's, you know, you lay it all on the line, you know, and if you win, great. If you lose, you lose. But, you know, if you're passionate and you're right, you'll win more often than not.
So you get the verdict and it's 289 million.
That's right. That's right.
And what is going through your head? What is the interaction with your client and the family? What happened?
It was one of the most emotionally fulfilling and intense experiences of my life. You know, every day of that trial was precarious, to put it lightly. Our mantra was, hey, we're still the case hasn't been dismissed. That means we're winning. that was it. Provided we were still allowed to come into court, still allowed to do stuff, we were winning. That was our viewpoint. And Judge Bolanos, who was overseeing that judge, she was brutal. I don't think I won more than one argument the entire trial. Even things that were bonkers, just like, Your Honor, this exhibit is an evidence. She's like, and Monsanto's like, no, it's not. Well, then Mr. Wisner, you can't use it. And I go, they're wrong. It's an evidence. Ask the clerk. Oh, Monsanto says it's on trial, so it's not evidence. And okay, and I move on. Then, 10 minutes later, the judge goes, clerk, is this document evidence? And the clerk's like, yes, it's an evidence. And I'm like, what is, friggin' Lala and whatever. I'm not going to get on that. The point, though, is the verdict. So, waiting for a verdict, right, after you're done, is the most painful experience you can imagine.
Yeah.
You have no control. You have no power. You are fully the effect of whatever is about to happen. And it's nerve-wracking. They come out with questions and you're like, what does this question mean? Does it mean this? It's just a complete nightmare. And gosh, I remember, okay, so we're sitting there and this trial was super high profile. I learned a lot. I remember the first day of court, I came out of the courtroom after my opening statement and there was, 25 cameras and news reporters. Mr. Wisner, and I was like, and I was just like, I don't know what I got. Stumbled and walked away because I was so like, where am I? I thankfully had some people pull me aside, but here's how you deal with this, and train me how to like deal with media, but I didn't know what the heck I was doing, right? And obviously got better at it moving forward. But I mean, it was really high profile. So we were in the fancy courtroom in San Francisco, the biggest one they have, and the entire gallery is filled with people, video cameras, reporters, all here to hear the verdict, right? And I'm waiting. So we told there's a verdict. This is a bit of a story, but it's all very interesting, right? So we're told it's a verdict, right?
Fascinating to me.
and I'm like, okay, I gotta go find Lee because I had Lee nearby, like a park. He was just hanging out. He didn't want to be at the courtroom, which I understand. Trying to get him a hold of him, get over here, and he wasn't answering his phone. And it was whatever. Finally got him. He's on his way. Judge, he'll be here in 20 minutes. We can take the verdict down. Okay, great. So I go to the restroom with Dave Dickens. We go to the bathroom. We're sitting, and as we're walking into the restroom, we walk down this hallway. And the jury is sitting in the hallway, just sitting there. They've already reached their verdict, right? And you see them. And I look at this guy, this older man who is the oldest guy in the jury. He's a retired investigative journalist. He wore a suit to court every day and a hat. He's a very, very nice, sweet man. Mm-hmm. He's sitting on the bench, and I look at him, and I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, give me a sign. I'm freaking dying here. And he looks at me, and he kind of sighs. He goes, and he looks down. And I walk into the bathroom with Dave Dickens, and I go, did you see his face? And he's like, yeah, we lost. I'm like, yeah, I know. And we were just that. So when Lee got there, my expectation, based on what I'd seen the jurors' facial reaction, was that we had lost, that we were walking into a defense verdict, and all this was for naught. And I had to sit there for like an hour waiting for the whole process to get going, literally getting ready to disappoint thousands of people, my firm, again. And I could tell you all the trauma of having lost that first trial was cascading in my brain. And I'm sitting here trying to keep a friendly face and try to act like it's all good, but I'm dying, seeing the end of it, right?
Yeah.
So we're in the room, and I'm sitting there, and Lee's there, and Dave's there, and Pedram, who'd been there. We're at the counsel table. We're hearing the verdict. Aracelia's wife could not get there because she was working.
Right. I saw that.
And Judge Bolanos comes out and got reached the verdict. Yeah, she starts reading through it, and it's like 30 questions, right? And it's just like, we have to get yes to everything. And then there's the number, the first one, yes, second one, yes, third one, yes. And then I'm realizing we just won the first cause of action. And so I'm like, oh my God, we won. We're at least winning something. This is so much better than I thought this was going to be. I'm like, oh my God, we didn't just lose. Holy shit, this is great, right? We go through, and then of course, she gets the punitive damages. Yes, amount $250 million in punitive. They award him, $39 million in compensatory damages, which is itself remarkable, but then 250 in punitives. And I'm crying. I'm just bawling, right? There's so much emotion happening. And it's awkward too, because there's a bunch of cameras behind me filming the back of my head. Mm-hmm. And I'm bawling, but I don't want them to see that I'm crying. So I'm like trying to keep my head still. I'm crying. And the court reporter who had been there for the whole trial, she's crying because she sees me crying. And then I look over, and two of the jurors are crying. And I look at one of them, and I say, I mouth out, this is while the verdict's being read. I said, thank you. And they look at me, and they're like, no, thank you. And I was like, I cried some more. It was so intense. And then we read the verdict, and, the whole thing happens. And then the jury goes out, the judge has her concluding remarks, and then we all recess. And the courthouse sort of clerk comes out and says, hey, thank you so much for everything. The jurors are in the room. They would like to meet with you. So the lawyers, Monsanto and I, we all went back to meet with the jurors. And we get in there and I come in and they're like, we don't want to talk to Monsanto. And so Monsanto's like, all right, we'll be outside if you want to talk to us. So they go out, and then they're like, can we talk to Lee? And so we bring Lee in. And one of the jurors says, hey, listen, I have to get going in a few minutes, but I just want to say to you, Lee, that we are so proud of you and what you've done in this case. And, you know, we had your back from the beginning. And we know we had your back because we know if we were in your shoes, you'd have our back. And we stand up for each other, you know, in the city. And it was really just an incredible moment. We all hugged. There was lots of crying. It was really an incredible moment. We spent about an hour and a half, 2 hours with the jurors, just chatting with them, getting to know what they thought about this. And it was beautiful. Then everyone leaves, and I go out, I have to do an interview with a reporter or whatever. And then I'm done, and I leave the courthouse, and there's just me. Right? I walk back to the office, and we do the press conference and stuff. But what's so crazy about all that, right? The thing that really blows my mind is what happened afterward, because the judge, you know, was going to take the verdict away. She issued a tentative saying, I'm going to take it away. You know, whatever legal reason she concocted. Again, we had lost everything in front of her. So this was not a surprise, I guess. And at that hearing, and I was actually in Iceland. I'd gone on vacation after this. So I was listening in on Iceland, and Mike Miller was actually handling the argument. 10 of the 12 jurors showed up to the hearing.
Wow.
And they were so upset with the tentative and what the judge was doing that they each wrote letters to the court saying, we followed your jury instructions. We looked at the science. All of these arguments that you're making are not true. This wasn't punitive. This was compensatory. All the things that we wanted. I mean, we didn't tell them to do this. We had nothing to do with it. They wrote these letters to the judge. A couple of the jurors went to the media and did news stories talking about how this judge is taking away their verdict, how it's not okay. A couple of them wrote op-eds in the San Francisco Chronicle. I mean, these jurors were personally invested in this case being successful. And ultimately, the judge changed her tentative and upheld the verdict. She reduced it. Obviously, they always reduce it because, you know, $289 million is too much money, right? But, you know, and then ultimately went on appeal, and we won the appeals, and Mr. Johnson was alive to get his money. And now they live in a beautiful house in Napa Valley, and Arcelia isn't working, and she's raising her kids and sending them to nice private schools and providing the life that they never would have been able to do absent this lawsuit. It's really just a wonderful, that whole story is everything about how we help that family is why we freaking do this, you know?
Well, if you do nothing else for the rest of your life, I mean, that is such an incredible story that you can be so proud of. And I'm sure your family was just beyond themselves, and just the legacy that you're building there, and how you're helping people. But this wasn't the only one. You had 2 more trials that you were part of. And I mean, it all led, so you have $2.4 billion in change in verdicts between 3 trials, correct?
That's right.
And then that laid the groundwork for the settlement with Bayer for $10.9 billion, which you were very critical.
Well, I think the settlement's up to $16 billion now, I believe.
Is it really? Okay.
They're still settling. I mean, there's still more and more happening. But yeah. Laid the groundwork for some of the largest mass tort settlements in recent history, if ever. I mean, I think asbestos is the only bigger one that I can think of. So
right. So when you got your $1 billion verdict, because you learn a lot from that first case, and then you tried the second and the third, and you prepped really, really well, and sort of knew how to put the case together to go for a bigger ask. Tell me, because that was such an interesting way of just seeing sort of your growth within such a short span of time, to know that this case was bigger than ever, right? Bigger than you thought. So walk me through that.
Well, you know, so during the Johnson case, and this is sort of interesting, right? Because prior to the Johnson verdict, I was still not considered a leader in litigation, right? And everyone, frankly, thought the Johnson case was a loser. And they thought Mike Miller was nuts for taking it to trial, and triply nuts for letting this kid try this really important. I mean, I can tell you how many times people come in and say, I'm looking for Mr. Wisner. Oh, I'm Mr. Wisner. Aren't you a little young to be a lawyer? Like, hi, nice to meet you. Mm-hmm. Please come in. Can I help you with something? You fucking asshole, right? So it's just like, routinely, right? So that obviously put me on the map, not just as a trial lawyer, but I think as, a leader in the roundup litigation. And what I had said to people was, listen, a lot of the depositions that we've done, and a lot of the evidence we have wasn't properly put together for Johnson, right? And the issues were, asking foundational questions to get over hearsay objections during, examinations. And so about 90% of the evidence in Johnson, the judge excluded because we didn't have proper foundation, sort of technical exclusions. Clearly relevant, but just, we didn't have this exception or whatever. And so I went back and I redid everything. I retook all the depositions. I took multiple company depositions, one of Monsanto itself, which to this day is probably our most valuable deposition in the litigation, and just got all those documents properly certified and authenticated. I got some really great admissions. I took apart quite a few, because before this, I hadn't been allowed to take any of the depositions. I wasn't in leadership. I was a kid. I was not sufficiently seasoned enough. After that, I could do whatever the heck I wanted after the verdict. So I went and redid everything. We still had some great testimony from before. Obviously, we got a big verdict with that, but I really built out the rest of the story and really flushed it out. And the second trial was actually in federal court, and I did not lead that case. That was led by Jennifer Moore and Amy Wagstaff, two fantastic, dynamic attorneys. And but again, fate had its hand here. 2 weeks before it's going to trial, the primary expert, Dr. Chris Portier, our star witness, I'd done him in Johnson, has a heart attack. He's running on a treadmill. He's on sabbatical in Australia. He has a heart attack, and he on a treadmill. It comes off the treadmill. And the only reason why he's alive today is because the guy who was running on the treadmill next to him was a certified EMT and physically pumped his heart for 7 minutes to keep his brain alive.
Wow.
And they ultimately got his heart restarted. They put in a pacemaker. He lived, which was a freaking miracle. But the doctor was like, you can't fly to San Francisco in a week to go testify. You're grounded, buddy. And so we talked to the court, and the court said, this is trial's going forward, so figure it out. So I flew to Australia and we set up an entire not live, but videoed testimony with, the witness stand, the whole shtick, all done with high production and the lights and everything. And for 3 days, we took his testimony for both phases of that case, because that case was bifurcated on general causation at trial, which is also unprecedented, but it is what it is. And Dr. Portier ended up becoming a really important witness in that case. And if you ask the jurors, it was their most important witness for the science component. But that said, Amy and Jennifer in particular did a really amazing job. That case, everything was going against them. Judge Chabria put his thumb firmly on the scales of justice on Monsanto's side, put everything in favor of Monsanto, and they still won. They got an $80 million verdict, which is just phenomenal. I mean, just truly amazing. And it got affirmed. It got reduced, obviously, they always get reduced, but it got affirmed on appeal to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And now it's before the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll see what's going to happen there. But the funny part is I was actually supposed to try the case with Amy in federal court, but I backed out about 6 months prior because Mike Miller asked me to try the Piliad case in state court, right, which was going to overlap. And let's be honest, I'd rather be in state court, right? So, and this was in Oakland, which is a different court than San Francisco, but right across the bay. Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, Mike, I'll do it with you. And so we went, literally the day the Hardiman verdict came out, hit the news, we started picking a jury in Piliad the next day. So we, again, we got lucky, and obviously we had anyone heard about the verdict, and Judge Smith in Alameda she's a great judge. She retired recently. She's a phenomenal judge. She was overseeing the JCCP there, and was just an absolute, really even keeled, really fair judge, in the sense that I probably won my issues half the time. Probably a little bit less, probably 30% of the time. But still, 30% of the issues is a great situation in front of these courts, because they always go with the defendants. But she was really nice and thoughtful, and she denied their 8 motions for mistrial during the Pilliod case and all that stuff. But the coolest part about that case, and the Pilliods are this wonderful husband and wife couple who lived in Richmond. They both sprayed Roundup together, and they both got lymphoma, and her lymphoma was particularly bad. It was in her brain, and she's suffered for a long time. His was pretty severe, but it was in remission. And they had this incredible story, and they're incredible people, and I really got to know them well. Mm-hmm. But from a professional standpoint, the really crazy thing was I tried that case with Mike Miller. Mm-hmm. Mike Miller is back in full steam. He is a seasoned trial lawyer. He has more verdicts under his belt than I have had, birthdays, right? Mm-hmm. And he let me do the openings and the closings and some of the major witnesses. He trusted me to do it, which, God rest his soul. He did more for my career and giving me an opportunity than anybody, but I should say Michael Baum, who's probably done more. But Mike Miller, really, I can't say enough of him and his commitment to our firm and the relationship we had with him. We obviously love him, and we were so sad when he passed away just recently. But him and his wife Nancy, she's pretty amazing. She helped steer the bull, so to speak.
She worked in the firm, right? That's
right. She's an attorney. She works with Mike, and she was the common sense whisperer when Mike was getting a little hot-headed and bullish, which he sometimes did. We all do. We're all trial lawyers. We all have egos. Mm-hmm. She was really good at sort of, hey, Mike, cut it out. Like, let Brent do this.
What a wife usually does. Yeah. Exactly. Settle down.
She was amazing at that. And so, I had this opportunity to do this. And, the difference in the Pilliod case than in the Johnson case was all that evidence that we weren't able to use, we were allowed to use. And I brought the full arsenal in that case. And that's a testament to the verdict. I asked the jury for $1 billion, and they gave me 2. That's pretty nuts. Getting $1 billion itself is a weird thing to ask for. I'll just be honest. I had to practice that in the mirror for quite a while, because it sounds like, $1 billion, right? It's just like,
Yeah. So, that must have been just another high of thinking, I got this, like believing in yourself. And like you said, others taking you seriously. It's funny, as you were sharing that story, my husband, he's in tech, and, he was on Shark Tank and had this technology and started an engineering firm, ultimately got an offer from all the sharks, and then didn't really take the deal because they were really trying to take the company away from him. Yeah. But he had his 15 minutes of fame. He was like 32, 33 years old. And then he went out and raised capital on his own to start the company. I tell that story because one of the things that he would complain about the most is that people didn't take him seriously until he was able to get on Shark Tank and really give his performance, right? And so people would say, come talk to me when you're in your 40s, or, what you're trying to do, you're too young, you're not seasoned enough. And so I remember he's going to be 40 next month. And he's like, I love it. I love people actually take me seriously now. Because I'm like, oh, you're going to be 40. You're getting old. He's like, no, this is good. This is good for business. So I get that. I get how just wanting to be taken seriously and wanting to reaffirm yourself in the space, in the industry, in the courtroom was probably something that you personally had to, sort of overcome.
Well, definitely amongst professional colleagues. And I'll tell you, it's one of the things that we see with the plaintiff's bar is, and really in any industry, right? They want to give the work to someone who's done the work before. Right. And so it's very hard for young lawyers to break in and do, depositions. I mean, freaking trying a case in a mass tort, that's pretty much off limits for young lawyers. I just got dumb shit lucky, right? And by lucky, I mean lucky in the sense that Mike Miller, who I loved, was put in the hospital for it. I mean, that's terrible, but it's happenstance.
Right.
But I'll say this. In court, being younger, I actually have used to my advantage considerably.
Okay.
With the court, with the judge, you're going to get over the you're a young lawyer issue very quickly, because they'll say, oh, you're really smart and you're very honest. And every trial I ever do, or in any court proceeding, invariably the dynamics of the courtroom always turn into the same. The court looks to me for the truth, right? So the defendants or this happened, or factually this, and then very often the judge will be like, well, Mr. Wisner, is that correct? Is that what the record says? Right? I'm always the person they go to. So much so that sometimes the defense lawyers do that too. The record says this, right, Mr. Wisner? Right. Like I become the sort of guy who knows everything and also is honest about it. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so that happens very quickly, because the simple fact is I read everything and I have a near photographic memory, but not photographic, but pretty dang good memory. And I just lock it all in there and throw it out as needed. So it helps, right? But in front of a jury, I shave, right? I look very baby faced and I look as young. I try to keep the number of lawyers at my table to 1 or 2 at most. Right. I don't want the jury to see anything but David and Goliath. That's all they need to see. They need to see this young, passionate, crazy young guy taking on this evil corporation, and they want to be part of making that history. You create that narrative, and being young helps. Now, if I was older and had more gray hair, and I'm working on that, but when I get to that point, I'll probably shift it a little bit, right? Make it a different strategy, and you have to adapt to what you have. But I think using your youth in court is actually something that young lawyers can do very effectively. But you have to go all in, right? You can't get up there and act like you're the smartest, most seasoned lawyer in the world. You have to act like you're a noob, even if you aren't, and play and ride that through.
And hungry, right? That you want to prove yourself. So that brings me to a really great topic that I wanted to bring up with you. Because I meet lawyers from all practice areas that want to get into mass torts, and they say, mass torts is so political. Getting into a leadership position is very difficult. Chances of me trying a case, even though I'm a successful trial lawyer and look at all my verdicts, chances of me trying a case are slim to none. How does the next generation, I had a previous guest on my podcast, Paul Farrell, and he likes to use the analogy of the jungle and the lions and the porcupines and the different animals. And he's like, in mass torts, you got to figure out what animal you are, right? But how can a new breed of young lawyers come in and do what you are doing? Is that hard? Is that possible? What do you think?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? One, yeah, it is a jungle for sure. It is a tough industry. And frankly, one that I largely resent the politics of it in every way. I'm terrible at politics, just terrible at it. So what I do is I always make sure to align myself with someone who's really good at it. Let them handle the politics, right? And I've worked with different lawyers who've done great jobs in bringing coalitions and deals, and put me in front of a jury, get me in front of a witness, let me do the lawyering stuff, and please to God insulate me from that nonsense. But it's invariably part of it. I think if you want to get into this space and you don't really have any name or reputation or experience in it, I have 2 really, really big points, right? The first is get in bed with someone who is seasoned and able to push things, right? Because the really, really good mass tort firms, right? The ones that really have demonstrated consistent success and gotten big verdicts, they understand that politics are obnoxious, and they're always desperately looking for co-counsel who are competent. I don't know how many times we get these leadership structures that are just filled with people who just want the title and don't do shit. Or when they do stuff, it's incompetent and terrible. So if you're a competent lawyer and you align yourself with a good group, at least early on, you'll get exposure, and you'll be surprised by how quickly you get tapped. Now you have to be competent, and you have to do the work, and you have to be committed. But you do those things, there will be a lot of opportunity there. But the second thing is, and this is, I think, equally important, and this is something that Mike Miller taught me, and I think was it's really simple. It's just go to trial in state court.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Well, that means you have to have experts. So you have to pay the money to work them up and do it, but do it. And if you push pedal to metal in state court, it doesn't matter what MDL or whatever is happening, you'll get that experience, and you'll probably push the case to settlement even faster, right? The lack of sophisticated tactical court, collaboration between state court proceedings and federal court is actually sort of an incredible disservice to us. Sometimes it's very dysfunctional. There's a lot of people protecting their own little power, or they want everyone to be here. And all that is just garbage. Get to trial as often and as fast as you can. It's literally the only thing that matters. Win, lose, or draw, it will push the case towards settlement. That's just the truth of it. So, in mass torts, get to trial. And every single time, we have to slow things down. No, don't do tolling agreements. Don't do any of that stuff. Get to trial. And if you do that, you will be ragingly successful. You might piss off some people, but, mass torts, people have short memories. If you get a verdict, push against trial, everyone, all of a sudden, you're their hero. No, it was their idea from the beginning. Don't worry about it. But it can be intimidating. It really is. There's always really seasoned lawyers who have all this experience. And so my advice was, get someone who can shield a lot of that for you. Mm-hmm. Say, listen, coach, put me in. I'm here to help. And, take the lumps, because it's going to be a bit of a grading on your ego. If you're a very successful trial lawyer, it's going to be tough being sort of relegated to not lead trial lawyer at the beginning. But take your lumps, and then you can really get involved in it moving forward. But, it's a tough space. Yes. And I frequently contemplate, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe I'll go do something else all the time. Right. I'm not doing it for the money anymore. So the question is, why am I doing this? Well, it's because I love helping people. And it's the day I feel like I'm no longer helping people, that all I'm doing is politics or this kind of mumbo jumbo, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'll do something else. I'll go work for a nonprofit or something. But for now, I'm still able to help people. And I think we can push cases to trial. That's how we do it.
So one person that comes to mind as you talk about just being a great trial lawyer and just showing the work, right? And letting the work speak for itself. The person that comes to mind is Mark Lanier, right? Sure. He's just the pinnacle, I think, of our business in mass torts. And he kind of stays out of politics. I'm not familiar, but at least from what I see from my vantage point of view, he just stays in his lane and he does what he does best. Have you, is he somebody that you look up to, or have you attended his conferences?
I think Mark Lanier is the finest trial lawyer I've ever seen or met in my life. And I have gone to his academy conferences multiple times. I send all of my young lawyers to that conference. I send the partners to that conference. I say, go there, go every year and learn this shit, because it's freaking brilliant. I'll tell you, I've taken so much from him and what I do routinely that helps in my trial work and litigation skills. So I can't speak highly enough of Mark, but I'll tell you this. He's just in the politics like everyone else. He's not above the fray. He's just really good at not letting it get to him. And he's also Mark Lanier. So you can basically say, fuck off. Right. So he has to deal with it just like anyone else. But I'll tell you, I follow his footsteps. I don't get involved in politics. I'm basically anybody who knows, who works with me. I do the same sort of thing. I sort of say, hey, listen, this is what I want. This is what I want to do. Take it or leave it. I'm going to trial. And hopefully you get on board. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I got kicked off of the MDL and Zantac, right? Because I wanted to go to trial in state court and the politics got me kicked off, right? Okay, so be it. I'm going to trial in California and we're running the JCCP out there. We have 1,000 cases. I mean, it's, we have a big litigation there and we're going to be going to trial in October next year. So we're excited about that. But, I think you just have to take the politics for what it's worth. And, I think Mark would agree with me on this, that at the end of the day, it's not about your power. It's not about your influence. It's not even about your bottom line, right? You want to help people. This is why we're here, right? I mean, he's a person of faith. He obviously has a lot of deep religious aspects to his life and practice. I'm not so religious in that sense, but I do believe in the basic idea that you want to help people, and you can do that, right? By getting their case to trial. And if the politics are getting in the way, then fuck the politics, because it's not the right thing to do. And you do that enough, and people know who you are and they know how to interact with you. And I have a lot of respect with a lot of people who are in the politics, and believe it or not, nowadays they very often will stand up for me and say, "Oh, leave Brent out of this. He's don't interfere with what he's doing. He's going to make us a lot of money. Stop it."
How would you restructure if we could talk about mass torts phase 2, right? You're going to have a lot of the firms that have been running the game probably out in the next 5-10 years, and people like you will very much be the go-to people that everybody wants to hear how you want the space to be of service to our society. So how would you restructure mass torts if you could answer that?
I think that a couple of big picture things. I mean, the first one is a lot of the organizations and sort of institutions that have developed around MDLs and mass torts are completely controlled and dominated by the defense bar. They just are. I go to these conferences every once in a while, these judge conferences, and it's me and 3 of the same other plaintiffs lawyers and 20 defense lawyers. We all know them, and all these federal judges chatting casually, drinking, getting to know each other, and having conversations that really affect the woof and warp of our practice. And bifurcation, general causation. If we look at what's going on right now in mass torts from a litigation perspective, is federal courts are being asked to more and more micromanage and influence every little aspect of a case. I mean, a good example is I just got a deposition protocol from the defense counsel in Zantac and then JCP that they want to institute. It was 30 pages long, basically like rewriting and having the court be involved in dictating how we take depositions, which is something that we've been doing for hundreds of years. Bizarre. It doesn't make any sense. And this tendency to busy work ourselves and create these things that become so important and we don't try a case for 5 years is a real problem. I think from a sort of self-organizational perspective, I think there's going to be a real come to Jesus, because what's happening right now is a lot of firms, and I'm not going to say who, but a lot of firms aren't doing the work and just holding on to large numbers of cases and trying to get them plugged into settlements, whatever they can get at some point. And
right.
We really saw this in Roundup, right? My clients, we settled their cases and they got, the best deal in the country, understandably so, but they got the best deal in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I see these thousands of other people who are with other firms who got, 10 cents on the dollar that we got our clients. And the only difference is that person called that number instead of my number, right? They just called the wrong phone number. If they had called this number, they would have gotten 10 times as much money. And I think there's a real problem with that. And it's a function of what we call inventory settlements, right? It's a function of the defense bar now is saying, listen, there's too many cases out there to settle globally, or we don't want to, or we're not willing to do so. We're going to take out the Brents, the Laniers, the whoever's, and take out their cases, get them out of the litigation, and then, leverage the fact that the people who haven't either done the work, haven't had an opportunity to do the work, right? Haven't been given a chance to. I mean, a lot of these people want to do it. They just aren't allowed to, right? They're not involved in leadership. And so they're just sitting by the sidelines. It's not like they don't want to do it, but they can't, right? Because they're not allowed to. And then suddenly all the leadership settles and they're like, well, okay, can I get the stuff? No, you get, it becomes this problem. I think long-term, I think two things need to happen. I think inventory settlements need to stop. Obviously, this is hurting my bottom line, right? Inventory settlements help my firm. We always settle higher than other people because we can try the case and we're usually heavily involved, right? But I think there needs to be a return to the global settlement model. And I think these people who are getting cases and warehousing them have to understand that they're going to surrender a chunk of their fee to the people who got them settled globally, right? There has to be that exchange, because the reason why inventory settlements are happening is because we've done all this work, we've taken all this risk, whatever, we should get our pay, and the way we get paid is by our clients getting paid more, right? But in the global context, that the whole thing is getting settled, right? That I think there really needs to be an understanding that people are going to not get the same percentage of the fee that I'm getting from my clients because they didn't do the work, they didn't put up the money, they didn't do that project, they didn't take that risk. I think that is going to have to shift, and we're going to either see the reemergence of global settlements with the imposition of probably uncomfortably high levels of common benefit assessments, or we're going to see a lot of these warehousing firms go belly up and not be able to get their cases settled. And there's going to be a sort of cascade, particularly with all the Wall Street money that's now in the market.
That was going to be my segue, right? Because I think we're in the precipice of something big happening on the money side, where you have all these capital sources waiting. I mean, there's been, as you know, a ton of money put into mass torts from Wall Street as it is on the debt deal side. Now you're going to have this equity deals that are already happening, especially with Arizona changing the laws. What do you think is going to happen? Because I can see all kinds of mass tort firms going into these equity deals and having access to unlimited capital and building out their infrastructures, and their inventories are going to be bigger than ever. But if there is no change in the leadership, like you were talking about, in the politics side of it, like, what does that even mean? Does that mean that we're really just getting more cases and there is volume, but there is less quality? Is it?
And here's the other problem, right? I think litigation funding and, equity deals can serve a really valuable purpose, right? It can give people access to justice they otherwise wouldn't. I mean, there's a lot of good parts about it, but it's also big money. There's going to be a reaction on the legislative level to this, right? We have a proposition in California that's being put on the ballot as we speak to cap attorney's fees at 20%. Now, I mean, that would devastate the mass tort industry. It would devastate most PI firms, right, in California. We probably have to leave California, and all these poor Californians are not going to get access to justice because, I mean, it's going to be really terrible. But that's a reaction, right, to this perception of big money mass tort lawyers making all this, flying around in their 100-person jets, and this guy, oh yeah, I got $100 million in capital and whatever. And I'll be honest, I don't fully understand who's betting on some of these lawyers. Some of them I totally get. I'm like, oh yeah, I'd fund you too if I could. But I mean, but some people, I'm like, they gave you $100 million. You've never taken a deposition in your life. Are they high? And there's going to be a reckoning there, right? And when those lawsuits happen, and when those things break apart, and all the dirty underbelly of that stuff starts getting exposed, there's going to be federal legislative action, and the lawyers who are trying to help people who aren't doing this weird seedy shit are going to pay the penalty. and ultimately the clients will. I think there needs to be some serious self-policing, which is an impossible thing to do when you're talking about an endless pot of money, right? Mm-hmm. So the truth of it is, I think we're the way things are going, we are on our road to a disastrous ultimate conclusion. And I think that it's going to be bad for the industry and bad for people. There's a way to avoid this, right? And a lot of it's going to involve maybe taking some preemptive policing efforts to how we're going to regulate ourselves and dictate these things. But if we don't, the defense bar is going to seize on it. They are going to make us, they're going to ostracize us. We're going to lose the goodwill of many courts, of the general population. And next thing you know, we're going to have these crazy laws being passed that are meant to correct this problem, correct the Girardis of the world, right? When really it behooves us to do it internally. So I mean that's a vague response to a very important question.
It is an important question. It's a complex question, and I think that, I mean, I've been in the business of deploying capital, and I've seen, what capital has done for law firms. For a lot of firms, it's been good.
Yeah.
And people have learned how to scale and how to improve the service that they're giving their clients. And then also have learned how to align themselves with the right leadership people that are trying the cases. And so a lot of people are doing it right. I think what's concerning is, like you were saying, that there are transactions happening out there, $50 million, $100 million to a firm that is just like brand new, has been in the business for 3-4 years. They just have the advertising machine down. So they're able to get the cases, but then they're just sitting on the cases. They're not working them up. They're not going to go to trial because they don't have a trial team. And they're trying to figure it out as they go. And along the way, you have missteps, you have problems that kind of mess it up, fuck it up for everybody else. And I think that's going to happen, but just like anything else in the world, there's, you learn from the mistakes when the mistakes happen, and then you make adjustments, right? You try to recalibrate. So I'm actually just as curious to see how this is going to unfold. And that's why I bring up these topics in the podcast, because it's important to raise awareness, and we should be openly discussing these topics in a way that is constructive and productive to the industry as a whole. And I would love to see you in more panels and more conferences, and you probably try to stay away from most of that. But it's important that people like you show up. It's important that we have young, passionate attorneys that come in. And they come in not because they only want the bottom line. They want to make a change, and it's coming from a place of really pure and good intention. The money, when you do the work and you do the work right, this, the money always follows. Money is not a concern. The only time you're trying to isolate or cut deals is when you don't know what the hell you're doing in the first place, right? But when you do, you have nothing, like you said, you don't hide from anyone or anything. You just speak your mind, and you stay away from politics, and you just want to try cases, which is honorable and respectable. One thing, because I know we're actually getting close to our 2 hours here. One thing I wanted to bring up that I think is kind of troubling to me, as I've seen the news recently, is that the Supreme Court recently just basically said he wants the Biden administration to look at the Bayer settlement in the roundup. And I'm just extremely concerned, because I know firms who are still waiting to settle, like thousands of cases they are waiting to settle with Bayer. What does this mean for those clients?
So I can give you the sugar coated, or I can give you the real.
I want the real.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's really bad for people who haven't settled. It's literally what I've been telling certain firms, that you just need to settle before this happens, because what's going on is it's the Hardeman verdict, right? And the issue is preemption. The issue is whether or not the fact that the EPA says it doesn't cause cancer, whether or not that carries the force of law. Now, we've won this issue in every single court, with the exception of one federal court in Georgia, which that case is on appeal. And I listened to the argument. I think we're going to win that one too. So pretty much the case law is unanimous on this point. So usually the Supreme Court doesn't touch it. But Monsanto has basically said this is a related, it's a huge issue. It's an important case. And they were supposed to rule on whether or not they would even hear the case. And instead of ruling no, they said, we want to hear from the Solicitor General. We know what the Solicitor General is going to say. They're going to say, yeah, take the case, because we know the EPA and the Department of Justice and all those people have been very hostile to these cases from day one. They have filed numerous amicus briefs. They've done everything in their power to suggest that we shouldn't be allowed to second guess the EPA. And so there's a real chance, well, we know what the Biden administration is going to do. And it's not the Biden administration. This is just the EPA, right? Whether it be Obama, Trump, or Biden, they've all been the same when it comes to Roundup. So this isn't a political issue. This is just what's going to happen. They're going to say, yes, take it, and yes, overturn it. Now, the Supreme Court might still say not interested. But if they take it, and if Monsanto wins, and remember, Justice Thomas, former general counsel to Monsanto, this is not a friendly court. Everybody who's not settled is screwed, because the preemption defense is almost an entire defense. Now, there's some exceptions here or there, depends on how they frame the question. There could be some cause of action that remains open. But if the Supreme Court comes back and changes the law on this, people who are not settled, their $50,000 offer won't ever be more than $1,000, and they're really screwed. So just to be honest, it's really scary. It's not the end. We still got a lot of fight left. We still got a lot of things. And frankly, the law is actually on our side. And so is justice and truth and all the things that frickin' matter. But this is a real risk. And it's one of the reasons why I told my clients, don't opt out of the settlement program that we put together. Take the settlement. This is better. This could get really ugly really fast. And this latest development, the likelihood of it getting ugly has increased. So for people who haven't settled, if you have a valid settlement offer, I would seriously ask yourself if you want to play this game of chicken. Mm-hmm. That said, do what's right for your clients. I can't tell you how to practice law. And if anybody has any questions about, the Roundup settlements and what they should do, I'll send me an email and I'll probably call you back. I hesitate to say that because I don't want to get 100 emails about it, so I don't have that kind of time. But if I have time, I will definitely chat with you and just give you whatever advice I can on the issue.
Yeah, I know some firms with large inventory, so maybe I'll make the connection. Sure, and you can give some feedback.
Probably know them.
You probably do. Who are switching gears? Because I want to cover one more thing. Who are the rising stars, in your opinion, in this space, and how can we get more women involved?
So that's an impossible question for me to answer, because I will invariably not say someone that I should have said, and they will be deeply offended by my failure to mention them. But I think I can answer the second question as much as I can, coming from a white privileged male perspective, right? One of the things that really I think is a disservice to the way MDLs are being put together is they characterize the inclusion of women as diversity, and they try to we have a diversity panel, and this is so diverse because we have half women or whatever on the group, and that is an important milestone in its own way. But in some ways, it invalidates it, right? And what we see happening routinely is, in a diverse leadership structure, the co-leads are male, or the leads are male, and the rest are you plug women into the PEC, and then very often they get marginalized, and it's sort of just the same old. I think what needs to happen is men who have positions of influence need to actually give their power over to women and do so routinely. And what I mean by that is, leadership, whatever that I'm doing here, instead of putting my name forward, put a female attorney forward or a person of color forward. And there's some fantastic female lawyers I work with routinely. I love them. They're amazing. And some really great minority attorneys that I work with regularly. So, I mean, it's not like there's not a lot of talent out there, but I do think that endemic to the legal profession, particularly amongst the older white guys in our profession, there's just ingrained misogyny. And whenever they talk about diversity, they're like, well, I support women in the law. I mean, I have 6 daughters and, I have a wife and, my daughter works at my law firm or something. And it's like, just because you had children doesn't make it not sexist, right? That's not an explanation. Just because you love a woman doesn't mean that there's not misogyny or sexism. That's not how it works, right? If literally having sex with women made me no longer sexist, I would be like the greatest person ever, right? No, that's not how it works, right? So I think there's some real, honestly, I think it's going to be fine in about 30 years when some of the old guard really just is no longer here. And you have this sort of younger, more woke group coming into the fray. But, we see some just absolute powerhouses of female leaders and attorneys, Jennifer Moore, right? She's just a complete badass. She started her own firm in Kentucky and probably the richest person I know now, frankly, after Roundup. She tried that. I mean, she's phenomenal. I work with her on Zantac, for example. She's our co-lead. And when I say co-lead, she's the lead. I just do what she says, right? And Amy Wagstaff, another great example. But there's a lot of great female lawyers out there. And frankly, my experience, they're better to work with because, they're just better lawyers. But anyway, teach their own. So
no, I love when a woman can walk into a mass tort event, wherever it is, with knowing and understanding the landscape that it is, run by these older white men that have been around. I mean, this is all they know, but they come in and they own themselves and they want to prove themselves in the courtroom. They're not asking for any special treatment. They just want an opportunity. Just like you said, you were given an opportunity. And if there is passion and if there is cause, let people run with that. It doesn't matter who it is, what color, what gender. And
I will say this is important. There's this fantastic organization that I wish I could be part of. It's called WEM, or Women in Mass Tort. It's run by a bunch of really fantastic lawyers who get together in Aspen every year, and they have it's like a great time. There's nothing like that with the men. I guess it's just mass torts made perfect, right?
Right.
Guys get together and hire whatever. That's not my scene at all. But that organization, if you're a woman who wants to get into mass tort, I highly recommend getting involved with that group because they are powerhouses. I mean, they are the future of our business without question. And they have a camaraderie and a sisterhood, so to speak, that we just don't see on in other areas. And frankly, I kind of am envious of it. So highly recommend.
Well, I've heard of the conference. It's hard to get into that conference.
Is it?
It's also political, right? It's like the vendors who sponsor it. They block the way for other people like me to come in because they don't have competition. So it's been hard to get in.
Fair enough. I politics rears its ugly head everywhere.
Politics everywhere. Brent, look, thank you so much for your time. This has been so insightful, so informative. I know a lot of people want to hear from you. So I appreciate you just being on here. And I may have to ask you to come on again on a panel with other people to continue the conversation. So, and look forward to seeing you in person, hopefully soon.
Yeah, maybe one day when the world calms down.
Right. For sure. Thanks again.
Really, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed chatting with you.